Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Unmuted herself, so that seemed to work.
Okay, so
Lionel, do you think it could be the headphones?
broadcast, because now everybody can hear us.
You got some more people in the attendees, Johnny.
Right, but what I'm saying is,
No, I was just
somebody click broadcast, so now we're live.
I didn't do it.
I didn't say you did. I'm just saying somebody did, so now we're live.
Yeah, that was me.
Okay, so you were ready to start the meeting?
It's fine. I'm just going to wait until a few more committee members trickle in, and then we'll go over how to run the meeting and all that.
Lionel, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
There's a message in the chat that says we can't unmute ourselves now because the broadcast started.
If you're an attendee, you cannot unmute yourself, but let's see.
So maybe we might want to answer that and say that's correct. You won't be able to eat during.
Jason, I just unmuted you. Chef, I'm unmuting you.
Okay, this is
Sam,
Jason.
can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Jason from Plant City. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Can you hear us?
Yes, I hear you loud and clear. I'm the new city engineer at Plant City. This is my second week, and I'm Fred Baxter's alternate. So I'm glad to meet everybody. Do you want me to get on a computer with a camera or not?
I don't think it's necessary. I'm going to be turning my camera off right now. Nobody needs to see me.
Yeah, so I've got everyone loud and clear, and everything's working normally. Thank you.
Hi, this is Allison. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Allison.
Yes. Can you hear us?
Allison, can you hear us?
Eric, can you hear us? I can't hear you. Are you self-muted?
Eric, you show as that you have your mute button on. You should be able to see a microphone symbol in the GoToMeeting. That microphone symbol should be green, not orange. You can test it also by the audio. There's an audio tab. If you click on the audio tab, you'll be able to see if you're using computer audio. You should see your microphone blipping as you talk. If not, you should click on the drop-down menu
My mic is not muted now.
and select the proper microphone. There we go.
You're not coming through. I don't hear you that well.
Okay, we can finally hear.
We can hear you now. Eric, see if there's an option under audio settings to turn up the volume on your speakers.
Or in your Windows, on the bottom right-hand corner of your Windows program, bottom right-hand corner, like where the time and date are, there should be a little speaker. Make sure that's cranked up.
Okay, I think I got it fixed.
There you go.
All right.
Good.
I'm good.
Awesome.
Achilles, can you hear us?
I can.
Brandon, can you hear us? Brandon, we can't hear you if you're talking.
Okay, Cheryl, are you listening?
Yes.
Okay, see how you have 3 attendees and 12 staff?
Mm-hmm.
If you go into the attendees tab, you'll see a hand and a question mark.
Okay.
If there's a question mark next to the person next to the person's name, that means that they've submitted a question or a chat. And you can click on that and it'll show you. If there's a hand, raised hand, like Wade just raised his hand, you can see Wade unraised his hand.
Yeah.
So then you can see that like they're raising their hand that they want to speak. So,
Okay.
so that's the way you can keep an eye on that like quickly. Except you will have to like scroll up and down and stuff. Even though there is a way to, I think, view in full screen mode.
Yeah, you can do the little call out box, but it doesn't make it really wide. You can make it longer.
Right.
That's about it.
Okay.
Lionel, I just asked Brandon to call you to troubleshoot. I'm not sure if he's talking, but I haven't heard him all.
I just stepped back by my computer. Can you hear me?
Oh, he's talking now.
Oh, okay, perfect. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I dialed in and it was not started, so I hadn't. I stepped away for a minute.
Okay. Brian's here. Brian, can you hear us?
Hey guys.
Hey, Brian.
Okay.
Hey, Lionel,
Yes.
what's not attentive? Should I yell at somebody for not being attentive? What is that?
Because Josh is not attentive. Yeah. I don't know. But so everybody that's a panelist or an organizer should all be unmuted, and you should self-mute while you're not talking. And then if you need to speak, then unmute yourself. As far as the attendees, we will leave that up to Cheryl. Cheryl, will you be unmuting the attendees if they need to talk?
Yes.
Okay. So each panelist or committee member will just mute and unmute themselves when they want to talk. The video, if you want to show your video when you're talking or not, the video of yourself, personal preference, whatever you guys decide, you would just click on your video camera to see yourself or turn the video camera off not to see yourself, however you guys want to do that. But while the meeting is going on, and if you're not speaking, to avoid feedback and background noise, just mute yourself, which is what I'm going to do at this time. Johnny, I'm handing it over to you.
All right, thanks, Lionel. Brandon, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I'm gonna leave you unmuted the entire duration since you're gonna be running the meeting. Before we get started, we sent you the instructions. If any of the attendees have comments or the panelists, they're gonna click that raise hand button and we'll go through those at the end of the presentation. Cheryl's gonna update us. She's gonna private message you and let you know if anyone has submitted either a hand raise or a comment. So we'll go through those at the end of the presentation. And when we get to public comment, if you ask any of the attendees if they have public comment, we'll unmute them as well if they raise their hand, okay?
Okay, will I be able to see the hand raise icon?
I'm not sure if you have that in the control panel as a panelist. Cheryl will just type messages to you if anything comes up that needs your attention.
And that'll be in that chat box.
It'll show up as a private message to you.
Okay.
Okay. All right. I think we're ready to get rolling if you are. The presenters have been informed that I'm gonna click through the slides on their verbal command. So as they present, they'll just say next slide and I'll click through.
All right.
Sound good?
Fair enough. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. And just going down the agenda. Oh, I guess before we get too far into it, I know Johnny, you had mentioned to me, if I remember correctly, that in this meeting format, we really won't be able to take any actions. So we'll table action items for next time, unless you have different instructions or if I didn't quite get that correctly.
That's right. The committee can provide comment on the UPWP, which is the only action item. And if you have any suggestions, we'll take those into consideration, but we can't have an actual vote on it. So I guess
okay. Does that apply also for like the approval of the minutes?
Yes, it does.
Okay. So I don't know if anyone has any comment on the minutes from the January 9th meeting. Now would be a good time to make any comments that you've got. But as far as approval of those, we will table that till hopefully only till next quarter, and we can get back to a normal routine of things at that time. Did anyone have any comments that they wanted to make on the January 9th meeting minutes? All right, hearing none, we will move on to that action item of the Unified Planning Work Program. And I will let Allison give her presentation, and then we'll just make comments as needed and then table the actual action item itself.
Allison, you're self-muted.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'll leave my camera on for the duration of my presentation. So the item you have in front of you right now is the fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22 Unified Planning Work Program. And in your agenda packet, there is a link to the draft document that was submitted to Federal Highway Administration and Federal Department of Transportation and the DOT in March. So we're just getting comments back from them now. So this is why we're taking this draft through the committees with the thought of adopting in May. And I'll recap that later. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So this document is required to have a major update every 2 years. It starts our fiscal years start every July. So this document will run from July 1st, 2020 of this year to June 30th of 2022. And essentially it's our work program. So it outlines all the major planning tasks we're going to do, and we'll document our federal and state funding and coordinate the funding and planning tasks for the MPO, HART, and the DOT. And it's needed to comply with our federal and state rules. Next slide, please. That's a new cover, by the way. Before we go on to what the projects that are in this new draft document that you're reviewing, I wanted to recap some of the major tasks that were accomplished in the past 2 years. So you've been part of the 2040 Long Range Transportation Plan update process with us, and so you've gone through and helped review and improve, all our data analysis, all our outreach and documentation. So, you just saw the tail end of that this year, in fact. Along the way, we also worked on air quality benefits of green noise walls. That was one of our project, as well as the Vision Zero implementation studies. Community transportation coordinator, that's for our transportation. That's done every year. We did a part 2 for the HART South Shore transit reevaluation, and we continue to update the health atlas that's on our website. As well, we've been doing maintenance on the multimodal level of service methodology. We regularly update our public participation plan and our measures of effectiveness report, as well as continuously conduct regional coordination at different levels. Resilient Tampa Bay Transportation Pilot was one of the projects we did, as well as the school transportation study. And you've also seen the state of the system report. And recently there was actually the Temple Terrace Low Speed Network Study. And oh, I lost it. Okay, I see it again. Temple Terrace Low Speed Study and the USF, thank you, Johnny, Autonomous Vehicle Feasibility Study. And something that's very important to us, the Vision Zero Action Plan and reporting continues to happen from year to year. So next slide, please. There are projects that we're working on right now that are going to span multiple fiscal years. So we're working on them right now. They will go past June 30th, the end of our fiscal year, and go into fiscal year 21, which starts July 1st. One of those is the data platform performance monitoring and the data portal, which looks at crash data. I'm sure this group is probably especially involved in that aspect. We're working with Cutter on an equity scorecard, as well as there's a study for the Plant City Transit Feasibility Plan that's continuing. I mentioned earlier the Vision Zero. Specifically, we're working on some corridors, studies for corridors of unincorporated Hillsborough County, as well as a follow-up to the Long Range Transportation Plan. The regional MPOs are putting together a summary document for the regional LRTP. Next slide, please. Is my volume okay? I can't tell. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, it sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. The sixth task that you see here, it encompasses all the work that the planning, that the MPO does. So this is where basically all our funding is spent for our staff and planning projects. Transportation planning management is sort of like nuts and bolts. It's the work program, grants management, all our compliance activities. Task 2 is where you see a lot of the projects we talked about, everything from ITS projects to the resiliency projects to complete streets, Vision Zero, the freight and transit planning, the transportation disadvantage, and all the corridor and environmental studies. Task 3 is our long-range transportation plan and data collection, and those are some of the data tasks that I talked about earlier, the data portal. Task 4 is the 5-year short-term transportation improvement plan. That's where project prioritization happens, as well as the coordination with the state on their transportation improvement plan. Task 5 is all the great work that the committees do, and our USF fellowship program, as well as all the newsletters and all these meetings you're attending actually, and really all the outreach we do. Finally, Task 6 is where we do local and regional coordination. So all our activities regarding with local jurisdictions, as well as with TBARTA, the Chairs Coordinating Committee, which is the regional MPOs, are done in this task. Next slide, please. This is a snapshot of the budget. It will be tweaked a little bit because we are getting more finalized budget numbers from the DOT, but essentially this is the budget for the next 2 years. The first 3 rows that you see where it says PL, that stands for planning, STP, Surface Transportation Policy Funds, and then FTA, Federal Transit Administration Funds, that's our federal funding. So that's what our allocation from the federal government is. And then CTD stands for Florida Commission for the Transportation Disadvantage. And that's sort of a modest amount of money we get for TD planning, but it's a really important part of our planning as well. So the total budget for year 1 is approximately $2.8 million. And it includes money that we're rolling over from the first year. Some of those projects I mentioned earlier that were ongoing are rolled into this budget here. Second year is approximately $2.3 million. Next slide, please. This chart, this pie chart is just to give you a sense of where some of that funding is going. I mentioned that system and corridor planning, that's our task 2, and our long-range transportation plan and data collection. It's about 62% of all the work we do. So that's, really strictly planning work. And if you add that to our transportation improvement plan prioritization, our public involvement, our local and coordination, that represents 90% of all the work we do aside from the compliance activities that we have to do. I just wanted you to get a sense of how the money is spent. Next task, please. Next slide. Sorry. In February and March, we went to the committees and asked them for project ideas. So, and they came back with some motions regarding projects that they would like to see in the work program, or really analysis, either by staff or consultants. So this is a summary. The Bicycle Pedestrian Committee asked for best practices for street sweeping and maintenance for bike lane infrastructure. The Livable Roadways Committee was interested in right-sized parking calculators, looking at best practices for electric vehicle charging, which I think this grant might also be interested in. Continue audits in the school safety study, as well kind of a safety and park speed zone study, which has become very relevant for many of the committees due to the crash on Bayshore last week. So CAC had a motion to study uniform buffered bike lanes and have standards countywide. TAC recognized that they wanted to look at local level projects with respect to vulnerability and resiliency, and they wanted to coordinate that with studies that are ongoing and any new planning that's going on in the county. Next slide, please. The jurisdictions in Hillsborough County, including the municipalities and HART, also typically submit requests to us. At this time, we haven't received any specific planning related requests from Hillsborough County government. Tampa was looking at comprehensive school safety studies for 5 of the schools in the city of Tampa, speed management program, before and after studies. They're looking at Vision Zero corridor studies and safety assessments, as well as green infrastructure and best practices. There is an interest in transportation innovation speaker series, which I think many of the committees would be interested in too, and looking at advanced parking management systems. The Temple Terrace is interested in a trail feasibility study, an alignment study, and an update to the multimodal mobility fee that they have. Plant City had made some requests in 2019, and they're sort of reprising those requests for a Strawberry Festival special use transportation study, as well as a canal connector trail feasibility study. For HART, we actually have a special category for HART in our task 2 planning, which, you know, because we receive FTA funding for transit and transportation development, demand management. So there is a request for a bus stop inventory assessment study, tri-area circulator project, on-demand downtown circulator, looking at CSX rail service, ferry services study, and a streetcar extension study. Next slide, please. And I think these slides are made available to you. I know I'm kind of running through the projects a little quickly. So as a part of compliance activities for our federal funding, we have a number of what we call critical path projects and analysis that we need to put into our plan and budget for. And they total in the next 2 fiscal years about $650,000. And you'll see the top 3, the data platform monitoring, the data analytics, smart cities. Those are all things that I think this committee has been involved in. As far also, we need to do our traffic counts for Hillsborough County and the city of Tampa, as well as our transportation disadvantage planning. And as a part of our community engagement, we fund 2 fellowship programs each year for USF planning students. And then we have our Vision Zero implementation and reporting, as well as continue our Plant City transit plan, and of course our regional planning that we do continuously. Next slide, please. Now, along with those projects, there is a number of projects that have been requested by a number of people. This is in addition to what I showed you for the committees and jurisdictions. So one of the most prominent projects is the I-275 Boulevard Conversion Study. And we had that scoped out with some preliminary scoping for that. And it can run up to $1 million and no less than $800,000. We try to include the most realistic budget so that we don't under budget and not be able to pay for something. There's also some thought to a community health impact study for the 2045 long-range transportation plan, looking at something like storm evacuation forecasts and shelter-in-place scenarios. With resiliency, we also feel the freight supply chain might be an important thing to look at. Multimodal school safety reviews has been a continual request as well. And then there's trail feasibility studies for, non-automotive transportation being looked at, as well as electric vehicle facilities needs assessment. Plant City would like to look at their Southeast Master Plan to have a traffic analysis of that, and of course a HART bus stop assessment. Aside from the Boulevard study, which we have some preliminary scoping going on for to figure out the cost of that, we estimated the cost of the rest of these projects based on past projects, and the bill is about $1.8 million. Will you give one click to the slide? Okay. What we have is just under $900,000 available for these projects and all the requests that I showed you. So we're bringing this information to the MPO board next week, and we're going to ask the board members to give us what they feel are their top 5 preferences, so that we can find a way to at least initially move some of those projects into the work program. That probably, by the time the final product gets to the MPO, the final product gets there, we will have hopefully a more finalized list of what some of the potential projects are. Next slide, please. So the schedule is like this. This month, we're going through all the committees with this presentation to show them the projects that will be in the draft plan and asking them for any comments they have, any final comments they have on the draft plan. The MPO plans to adopt the work program May 13th, and they need to do that in order for the document to be effective July 1st, and that we can actually expend our federal funds as of July 1st. And the document, as I mentioned earlier, will run for 2 years until June 30th, 2022. There will be some amendments along the way, but this is essentially our work program for the next 2 years. Next slide, please. And as Johnny mentioned earlier, we are not actually taking formal action on this, but we would like your comments, and I'm happy to answer any questions you would have, and we can take your comments forward to the MPO at the MPO meeting. Thank you.
Were there any comments that anyone wanted to make? Allison, I had a question for you. Just looking at the studies that were there on your next to last slide, I wondered if you anticipated any changes or any additional needs that might be brought to light as a result of our current emergency management situation. And really just looking at that list, the study about the study about supply chain and resilience seemed to me to be a fit for the situation that we're in. We might be able to find out some more nuanced needs than we otherwise would have seen. I wondered if there were any other things in the same vein that you were anticipating. And I guess related to that, would there be an opportunity to shift focus a little bit and to insert a different priority if it was to be identified as a result of what we're seeing right now?
Let's go back to that slide. I think it's 3 slides back, Johnny. Sorry, I don't have numbers on these slides right now. There you go. So these potential studies, Brandon, are actually not cast in stone at all. They've been bubbling up in conversations with committees, the jurisdictions, and some of the board members. So to your question of whether these are adjustable, they are. The ones that are somewhat set is the slide before this, with the critical path projects. We do need to go forward with that. So this kind of $894,000 that we think is left for discretionary, for different projects is where it is possible to adjust that. We are, what you said about supply chain and what's going on right now is exactly why we were thinking that. We've been working on sort of environmental resiliency, resiliency to flooding, and it's important, but we recognize the social and economic aspects are just as important, and we just haven't been able to move to that next level yet. And with hurricane season coming and with the social distancing coming on, you can already see problems with evacuation and doing that at the same time. So this is your opportunity as a committee and to share those kind of thoughts with the board so that when they're picking their top 5 preferences, it could be considered if you as a group feels that that's important. That's why the TAC had mentioned they would like to see more resiliency and sustainability work and for projects at the local level. I think that was Jeff Sims, the chair of TAC, had kind of that thought when he put that in. It was kind of a general motion, but he was thinking in terms of how do we move from the broad resiliency analysis to a locally specific analysis. So I think that you're kind of on target with that. So these are changeable, and we may not be able to form many of them. There's more just on this one list than there is available funding right now. And if we had the surtax funding in place, I think we would be able to fund all these plus some. Johnny, do you need to make any? I guess we're just asking.
I don't see any hands raised in the dashboard. Do any of the panelists or do any of the committee members have questions?
Or any comments you want to communicate it to the board, I guess.
Or comments to communicate to the board members. Sure, I'm not seeing any comments come up.
Allison, I guess I'll just reiterate that it's given given the, I guess, salience of the topic that those related to resilience, supply chain management, even the shelter in place and stay at home, or shelter in place or evacuation plan study might have a little special significance given just what we've seen in the last few weeks.
Would you want to ask the group if they also concur with you? Oops, sorry.
Yeah, so I'm curious, do any of the other committee members have a thought or a comment to make specifically on that?
Or would you all be in support of Mr. Campbell's statement? I can't see that.
Hopefully that's a good sign that nobody else is saying anything. Hopefully there's not a. There we go. There's one comment.
Sorry, Chair. Please give me one moment to just make sure that everyone's unmuted. I don't want to pass up someone because we accidentally had them muted. All right, it looks like we're good. Achilles messaged in the chat that he said he would be in support of Brandon's statement.
All right. So hearing no comments, Johnny did actually mention to me that I failed to ask for public comment in the opening of the meeting. I think we had a bit of a miscommunication on the order of things. So I skipped a step within our agenda, and I'd like to move back toward the beginning of the agenda and ask if there were any public comments I know we typically don't have many even face-to-face, but definitely don't want to neglect to offer the opportunity for general public comments to the committee, even outside of this UPWP presentation, but just as a general open discussion.
So
and we typically limit those.
I'm sorry, Brendan.
No, I was just going to say we typically limit those to 3 minutes. If we have some sort of technical issue, then we're not going to be too big sticklers on trying to stick to the rules, given we're in a different kind of setup today.
So if anyone listed as an attendee to the webinar has a comment to make, please click the raise your hand button and then we can unmute you. All right, Chair, I don't see any hands raised.
All right, well, thank you. We'll move on now to the status reports, the first of which would be from Eric Hill from MetroPlan Orlando on the capability maturity model assessment.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I first want to just note that the presentation that was included in your agenda package is a little different from the presentation that I'm using right now. I will apologize because I went ahead and I forwarded to Johnny by mistake. So what you have in your agenda package is different from what is being presented this afternoon. And I'm sure that Johnny will be able to provide you with a copy of this presentation if he already has not. So this afternoon, I just want to share with you an effort that we've had underway for over a year now, and working with the MPOs in the I-4 corridor. And as you noted, a part of this presentation is going to review the results of a capability maturity model. This is a model that's being advocated by Federal Highway Administration for understanding and evaluating how agencies are advancing transportation systems management and operations. So this presentation, first, it's going to just speak a little bit about TSMO. I'm going to share with you what MetroPlan Orlando has been doing with this TSMO program, and then speak about the regional effort that we have underway, again, working with the MPOs as well as the districts in the I-4 corridor. And then I'll reveal or provide you with the evaluation from the maturity model. And then just talk a little bit about some of the resources that are available as agencies are trying to advance their TSMO program. Next slide. So this is a definition of TSMO. And I always provide this in my presentations. And then I just say, well, the elevator speech is, how do we use transportation more efficiently? How do we use information communication and technology to better our transportation system, improve security, safety, and reliability? That's the definition of TSMO. And then I go on to the next slide. Why do we do TSMO? Well, the obvious reason that everyone's confronted with is there's limited funding. I can't think of any transportation agency, whether it's an MPO or DOT or a local jurisdiction, that hasn't struggled with funding of their transportation program over certainly the last 20 years. The next one is advances in technology. If anyone has purchased a late model vehicle, you probably recognize already that you're riding on a smartphone with tires. The vehicles that are being manufactured now and that will follow are all just loaded with a bunch of technology. And that technology is providing information to the infrastructure and receiving information from the infrastructure on conditions and how people can travel more efficiently and smarter. So there's the advances in technology. There's a greater expectation on customers with this advancements in technology. We live in a society now where everything's expected right away. We expect responses to any requests that we make. And so in the transportation world, we're also seeing that attitude come more and more into play. And then there's a better understanding of what causes congestion. And that leads to the next slide. So many of you probably have seen these graphs showing the sources of congestion. And it's not always capacity, as most people think. There are events, there's work zones, incidents, weather, signal retiming of our traffic signals. And it's different for urban versus rural. And I like to say that the major difference in the rural area is that because they're rural areas, because there's a lot of distance between urban areas, locations that are responding to incidents, that this is more a question of life and death because of the distance, and that responders have to travel. They have to find a location. If it's on a rural county road, it could be hard to find. So I think that's the major difference between rural and urban congestion, and the point that I like to make, and that's safety. Next slide. So TSMO strategies are listed here. The one that I'm missing and the one that I always get questions on is connected and autonomous vehicles. Yeah, that's part of where we're headed. You know, we're moving, transitioning from the 20th century to the 21st century. And so connected and autonomous vehicles will certainly have a role, a significant role. And I also like to kind of put this in perspective because there's the question of, is it TSMO or is it ITS? As I view it, and I think it's the perspective that the Federal Highway Administration is taking, is that we have the TSMO umbrella, and ITS is one of the components under that umbrella. And so the strategies you see here, some folks will look at some of them and say, yeah, that's an ITS. Well, that's very true. But these are some of the strategies that we have been promoting at MetroPlan Orlando, and that's being, again, advanced on the management side of the, or let me say, the non-reoccurring side of mobility. Next slide. So just a little bit about what we've been doing at MetroPlan Orlando. We have developed our program. It's been in existence for about 15 years. We started back 15 years ago. This image here is the first project we started. The gentleman in the middle there at the time was our board chairman, and his name is, it's from Orange County, he's Commissioner Ted Edwards. On the left side, we have Sheriff Berry, and then we have the Florida Highway Patrol Trooper Commander Brown on the other side. And Commissioner Edwards and I kind of came to terms in understanding congestion, and I shared with him how traffic incident management is one of the key ways we can manage our congestion on our roadways. You know, if we can get our responders to incidents, you know, we can clear up those incidents and move traffic. And so we came up with this program, this campaign called Move It Yes You Can. And what it is the vehicles can operate and there are no injuries, then by law, you have to move those vehicles. And I'm from a generation that when I learned to drive, I was instructed that if you're in a crash, for liability reasons, you don't move the vehicles. But all that's changed, and this is from a different state. So part of it was education, and we also teamed with our engineering folks, fire and rescue, law enforcement, media, and we launched this campaign, Move It Yes You Can. it was very successful. It also marked the time that as an MPO, a planning agency that didn't do much in terms of management and operations of our transportation network, it was an opportunity for us to come out of our sandbox and go play in someone else's sandbox, and then to invite someone else to come play in our sandbox. And because of the success of this program, and this is one of the things I learned about elected officials, is that this for Commissioner Edwards was free advertisement, free campaign information. And so some of our other board members, our incoming chairman, he saw this and he said, I like this and you need to continue this. So what he asked us to do is look at the 10 worst first behaviors and locations in our region, and let's try to attack those or address those issues. So that was the second thing. And at the time, we created our TSMO department. We created a committee. The committee, it's a committee that operates with bylaws. The chair of our committee sits at the board table, doesn't cast a vote, but is at the table to report out on our TSMO activities as well as to respond to any questions. We allocate about 21% of our surface transportation funds to TSMO projects and activities. And just as I spoke about Commissioner Edwards, we've had a slew of champions that have engaged themselves in TSMO, and they have seen how addressing non-recurring congestion is perhaps a better way for us to use our resources, and we've been able to show the value. And so Commissioner Edwards, he's been a champion. Commissioner Morris, who followed him, was our champion. Our current champion is Commissioner Delary. He's our current chair as well. And I think our biggest champion, and I'm not sure how many of you may remember Congressman John Micah, but he in Congress, we were able to also convey to him the importance of TSMO. And so the program, the Advanced Transportation Congestion Management Technology Deployment program, is one that Congressman Micah created. And prior to it being announced, he came to one of our TSMO meetings and announced it and told us he expected us to win one of the grants. We did apply like many others. The first year it was available, we didn't win, but we went back and just did some debriefing and came back the next year with the application, and we did receive $11.9 million under that program. So that's key to one of the key ingredients in our secret sauce is, again, being able to have champions on our board, conveying to our board members the importance and the value in TSMO. It's not the silver bullet. I always make that known. It's not the silver bullet, but it is, one of those tools, and a tool that I believe needs to be used more as we go into the future in transportation planning. Next slide. So I'm transitioning a little bit into this I-4 corridor initiative that we've been working on for the last year at least. And these graphs pretty much show, the concerns that we have about the I-4 corridor between Orlando and Tampa. These graphs are a little dated. They are courtesy of Florida Department of Transportation. And so I like using them because, again, they make the point on why we need to look at using TSMO strategies to look at how we can respond to incidents, but then inform motorists within the corridor of conditions. And then one of the more important aspects is just managing the corridor. And the strategy, it's called Integrated Corridor Management, ICM, is one of those. And then personally, some of you may know this, and many of you probably don't because you don't know me, but I live in Tampa. I reside here in Tampa, but I work for MetroPlan Orlando. So I know this corridor. I've been traveling this corridor for 21 years. I have gone through the lane closures, the fog incidents, and I've learned all the back roads in Polk County, in Hillsborough County, in Orange and Osceola County. I know all the back roads because I've had to use those on occasion, several occasions. But again, this is part of what we're trying to do is bring some new strategies to managing this corridor, but then also bringing the MPOs to a level where we're consistent within this corridor, we're consistent within Central Florida. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not everyone emulating what we do at MetroPlan Orlando, but it's us sharing information, advancing TSMO, maybe not at the same rate, but certainly, hopefully we will get to a point where similar to what you have along that, what's called the I-95 Corridor Coalition, we have a similar type of program or activity in the I-4 corridor. Next slide. So these are the MPOs that we've been working with. We have included Sarasota Manatee and Pasco County. Sarasota Manatee because they, when we had a meeting and talked about doing something like this, they expressed the interest because they wanted to advance their TSMO program. Pasco County because they've gone through some leadership changes. This was one of the areas that they saw as an opportunity. Not only have they gone through some leadership changes, but Pasco County is exploding, and at some point they're going to have to start doing something besides just building additional roadway capacity. Next slide. So when we started this effort, we developed these tasks. The first three have pretty much we've been able to complete, and capability maturity model is one that I'm going to speak to a little bit later. But we've gotten through recognizing the opportunity. I've attended each policy board meeting, and each of your executive directors or the executive directors have introduced me and spoke about what we're trying to do in terms of just coordinating our efforts. And what I saw as an opportunity early on was just to do an evaluation of where everyone is with TSMO. And fortunately, the capability maturity model was available, is available, and I saw that as a tool that we could just use just to get an overview of where everyone stands. Task 4, formalize interagency agreement. That has varied. There has been some interest or agreement to signing, executing an agreement. There's been some hesitancy and for legitimate reasons. And then there's been the let's wait and see kind of attitude. And all those, again, I think are legitimate. And we are just, in terms of these internal to MetroPlan Orlando, my recommendation is, well, let's let that not be something that holds up this. And so, we're not, I guess we could take this task out, but I want to keep it there because as far as the long game goes, I think at some point we may need to look at this again. The next one is management, and that's working with staff at the MPOs, and then lastly, an evaluation. Next slide. So the model itself is a model, again, that was promoted and advocated by Federal Highway Administration. It came through the SHART 2 programs. It's an evaluation of key process and institutional capabilities at agencies to advance TSMO. And this was a model that researchers at TRB took from the IT industry and applied it to TSMO. Next slide. So in the model, there are 6 dimensions that are measured. Business processes, systems and technology, performance measurement, culture, organization and staffing and collaboration. And one of the things I learned in using this model is that not all 6 dimensions apply. to an agency. What the model does is, depending on who completes it, and it's completed by staff at the agencies, will determine which one of these dimensions really affect your agency, or that you can actually manage yourself. So in the MPO world, what I found is that usually it's been like 3 of these dimensions that they actually measure. We've also asked District 7 and District 1 to complete the models. And in District 7, they had results for all 6 of the dimensions. So these are the dimensions that are measured in the next slide. And the objective here is there are 4 levels, and the model is looking to help agencies evaluate where they are and help them get to the next level. The 4th level, you can call that nirvana, but it's where you are fully optimized in terms of TSMO at your agency. And the idea is getting better at getting better. Next slide. Now, this slide here is to show to you that, using this model, we are not just blowing smoke. I like to brag about District 5 and the working relationship that we have with District 5. And we have a consortium that has been in place now for many years. And so we did this model exercise back in 2014, again in 2017, to measure how far we've gotten better at getting better. And so you see the results here from 2014 in each of the dimensions. Again, we had MPOs that were part of this, and not all of them could measure each of the dimensions, but certainly District 5 could. One of the things I like to point out, because this has been one of the questions I get, is if you look at the performance measurement and you look at consensus freeways, you see that we went down a level. And I think part of that was the understanding and education that we all learned. We all thought we were doing better than we actually were. And so, when we went ahead and did the evaluation the first time and looked at it again the second time, we recognized that we weren't as good as we thought we were. Next slide. And so what came out of that exercise is a TSMO operations and implementation plan that District 5 has completed, and that we are now using parts of it. Most of it's the department's work. Some of it's the local jurisdictions, and then it's the MPOs. We kind of, we can do what we can that's in this, that's more planning. Some of the MPOs in District 5 are doing more in terms of operations, like MetroPlan Orlando, and I'll mention some of that a little bit later. Next slide. So when we asked, when Hillsborough County MPO completed the CMM, Johnny completed it, but we also had District 7 completed. And so this graphic shows where you measured yourselves in terms of each of the dimensions, but also where district, actually this has District 5, I apologize. Johnny, I apologize, and I will get this corrected and I will send it out to you. So I believe what we can do here is just look at where you are with Hillsborough County's results, and those are the red X's. But those are the dimensions that you responded and indicate where you are. Next slide. And so when you look at each of them separately, it breaks it down. The model itself does a lot of work in the background and comes up with how you're going to move from where you currently are to the next level. What you're looking at here is for under business process, you evaluated yourself as being on level 2. And so how do you get to level 3? And it gives you an idea of how you can do that. Then it looks at the areas where you want to focus your work, and that is in planning process and programming, budgeting, doing something similar to what we've been doing at MetroPlan Orlando with it, certainly allocating some funds to the TSMO program. And then working and building a relationship with the department. As I mentioned, we have what I believe is a very good working relationship with District 5. We not only have our TSMO committee, but we have a TSMO consortium that covers District 5. In addition to that, we have a connected and autonomous vehicle partnership that we have underway that we use to advance that area. So this is business process. The next one, Johnny, next slide. Systems and technology. This gets more into the engineering, but again, this is where you evaluated yourself at being on level 7, level 2, and advancing to level 3. And some of the areas that you want to look at according to the model. And again, this is, more of the engineering work, not as much planning, but working with the jurisdictions in your planning area, working with the department, being involved with the regional ITS architecture, and then being part of those TSMO projects and strategies that the department is advancing, and certainly getting management involved with your TSMO program. Next slide. The last one is performance measures, and this is one, again, that every MPO has to start doing performance measurements. And so TSMO certainly provides the data for you to do evaluation of your TSMO strategies and programs. Acquiring data, acquiring the data is one of those areas where you can build a strong relationship with the district itself. And I'm aware that between the department, Qatar, and the city of Tampa, that the MPO is doing a lot of work in this area. So I was kind of surprised that you had evaluated yourself as just being at level 1, but that's okay. That's all right. We can go on to the next slide, Johnny. So some of the challenges and opportunities that we've had in doing this is staff turnover. I mentioned earlier that Pasco County is one of those where we've had staff turnover, and some of that has also occurred in Polk County. When we first started doing this effort, many of the MPOs were updating their long-range transportation plans. So us talking about TSMO kind of fell down to the bottom of the priority list. Change. This is a big one. Change, and this is cultural change. Because most MPOs and certainly board members, they see the MPO as just being a planning agency looking at capital building. And so when you start talking about TSMO and managing your system and going from the 20th century to the 21st century, and maybe you're not going to have these ribbon cuttings all the time for these big projects, that's change. It's not only change for the policy board, but it's change for the staff. Staff needs to understand that we're getting more into, using more data and using that in trying to change behavior. Some of what you suggested, Mr. Chairman, as far as resiliency and responding to the current pandemic, just think about how much this has conveyed or shown that not only can we use technology to reduce the number of vehicle trips that are being made, the vehicle miles traveled, but what we can do for the environment, because now we've proven that telework, that it works, that it has potential impact or impacts on mobility. The next one here is one that I have been challenged with here in the Tampa Bay area because we have 3 MPOs, and I'm familiar with the history and the discussion of having one MPO and wanting to keep the MPOs separate. So that's why it's been a challenge. So we'll just continue to work around it. The next one, resources. Applying or allocating not only the monetary resources but staff time to doing more in terms of TSMO. Shifting some of your skill sets, developing that workforce that needs to work more with engineers, need to look more at using data. That's one of the skill sets that's going to be more and more valuable in our industry. And then just timing, and the timing meaning, it's been a while. I mean, Johnny and I, we've been talking about this for at least a year. And just me being able to come to you, the ITS committee, it's taken a long time for me to get here. And a lot of that is just timing of your meetings, timing of meetings, and other responsibilities that I have as well. Next slide. These are just some of the resources that I know we have in District 5. We've capitalized on the National Operations Centers of Excellence, their advocacy group for TSMO. A couple months ago, we had the managing partner, Patrick Sung, come to our TSMO consortium meeting and just share with us what they're doing and what's happening at USDOT in terms of TSMO. The website is just chock full of resource information on TSMO and how you can advance your programs. The Operations Academy, I've gone through this academy. Many of the District 5 staff have gone through it. Some consultants in the Orlando area have gone through it. But this is basically 2 weeks of immersion in TSMO. It's in Maryland. You are just essentially locked down, and you are just TSMO all day and then part of the night. But it's a very rewarding program. You come away with rich knowledge in TSMO and also a network of TSMO individuals from around the country that you can reach out to and certainly learn a lot from and share information. Next slide. So next steps is developing some case studies, doing an evaluation of how far we've got with this and where we need to go. Pool funded study is one of the resources that we are going to be looking to get some additional resources so that we can continue this discussion and development of a regional TSMO program. And then the last one, the National Institute for Congestion Reduction. This is a grant that Qatar had won. We've been discussing with them about research opportunities in this area. And just kind of like as a side note, Johnny and I have been working with Qatar in the TSMO space, and we are developing or trying to develop ITS 101 curriculum that engineering students, political science students, planning students can take to think about how technology, information, and communication can be used in the transportation realm. So the next slide. So that's the end of my presentation, Mr. Chairman. If there are any comments or questions, I'm more than happy to respond to. And again, I apologize for that one slide that showed the results from the CMM. And actually, as I was speaking to that, I was thinking it's not that they're wrong. It's just that I had District 5 instead of District 7 in those spaces. So again, I can get that correct.
No worries, Eric.
Johnny. Okay.
No, thank you. That's a great presentation. I had a question for you. I think if I caught correctly, it sounds like MetroPlan Orlando has a TSMO committee, and I think just related back, you talked about ITS, basically a subset of TSMO opportunities and the TSMO tool bag. So I was curious, does MetroPlan Orlando have an ITS committee as well, or did they expand the mandate a similar committee to encompass more than just ITS and reform it as the TSMO committee? How did that come about, and what is the?
So it first started out when we had an ITS subcommittee of our technical transportation committee. It was a subcommittee. And so, and I'm going back about 15 years. As I think the industry started to recognize that ITS was more than just, putting surveillance cameras on the freeway system, putting sensors in the roadway. They started to recognize that these devices are collecting information. They can be used to modify travel behavior. And so that's when that's when I started hearing a reference to management and operations, or transportation systems management operations. And so it's evolved. And so when it evolved to TSMO, and part of my role at MetroPlan Orlando is just educating our stakeholders and staff on, how technology is being used in transportation. So I started using TSMO. And so once we proved, and this is one illustration, we have a committee that's made up of the mayors from the smaller cities in our area. And we were able to show them that we could get value out of retiming our traffic signals every year. And we proved that. We did it with benefit cost analysis, level of service, emissions. We proved that. And so they were one of the first leadership groups that helped us advance TSMO. And so it was at that point when we started talking about transportation systems management operations, and we just had it just evolved to TSMO. So ITS is still a phrase that's used, but as far as MetroPlan Orlando and a lot of our stakeholders, they refer to it just as TSMO. And think about also what's happening with connected and autonomous vehicles. It's kind of hard to say that that's ITS, it's technology, but it's not ITS in the traditional sense. I hope I answered your question. It's kind of a long answer.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think regardless of the terminology that we use, obviously our mandates are continually expanding. And I think I like the way that you have enumerated that and how you've labeled things even within your structure. So thank you for that. Mm-hmm. We do have a question I see from Chris Milster. I don't know if Johnny or Cheryl wants to unmute Chris, and then we'll let him speak.
Yeah, hey Eric, that was a good presentation.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, I just kind of want to on your resources slide. If you want to go back to that. Yeah, there we go. So the National Operations Center of Excellence, Eric, which I guess you helped. You're one of the founding members, right?
You're talking about the National Operations Centers of Excellence?
Yeah.
Yeah. And my role now is I'm on their technical advisory committee.
They have peer exchanges, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes, they do.
Workshops. So it may behoove the ITS committee to further look at that and reach out to them. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, it is. And if I can, let me follow up with that real quick, Chris. We are planning to have a we were planning to have a peer exchange in Orlando this summer. And if we are able to have it, maybe it's moved out to late summer, early fall. I will make sure that we extend an invitation to, I'll just say the MPOs in the IFO Carter, but certainly Hillsborough County to participate. And that peer exchange is going to be about, what we anticipate coming in the future in terms of technology and the changes and in the evolution in this part of the industry.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Okay.
Eric, do you know, so you talked about the Operations Academy, and I know that for a while there were regional operations forums and I don't know if those have continued. That was basically a shortened version of the same, but in different locations around the country. It was a week long. So I was curious, do you know, are those still happening? And what's the frequency of the Operations Academy as well? Just how is that typically organized at this point?
Well, I'm not familiar with the regional academies that you make reference to, so I can't address that one. But as far as this Operations Academy, it's every fall. It's typically in October, and we just had, in fact, the vice chair of our TSMO committee, Alex Laffey from the city of from Osceola County. He went through it this past fall, and every year it's usually late summer, could be summer, late summer. They send out a request for nominations to participate in the academy, and so every year when they get it out, I certainly circulate it amongst our TSMO stakeholders, and we've gotten just the one. Alex has been the first one to take advantage of it. And so what it is they offer scholarships. And so what each individual is responsible for is just air travel to Maryland and back. The lodging and everything else is paid for through the academy. And the other cost, if you will, is just your time out of the office and away from your family. Because again, it is 2 weeks, and you are pretty much locked down in TSMO because it's TSMO all day, and then you have you're teamed with other individuals from around the country, and you have assignments, you have projects, and a lot of that work goes into the evening. So that's how it's a great program. Again, I can't say enough for it because of what you learn, what you're exposed to, and then just the network that you build through this process.
Yeah, I think I'll add to that. I'd recommend it to anybody who has a chance. So I actually did go through the Regional Operations Forum, and the difference in the format was there were fewer like field level demonstrations, and I think the format of that was an attempt to reduce the burden of being out of the office for two full weeks. And okay. It seems like it was I think maybe the one that I went to was the first one. They were trying to tweak the format. They may have just decided that the Operations Academy, the 2-week version, was the way to continue with the program. But it was the same. I mean, it was the same staff. Kathy was the one who was organizing it. So, presuming that the content is all of what I saw at the regional level and more, I would echo your endorsement of the program. It was really good.
Okay.
Were there any other questions or comments for Eric? All right. Well, thank you very much, Eric. That was a great presentation, and hopefully we can stay in touch and see some good progress on maturing our capability along I-4. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Next, we have Jeff Sims to talk to us about the Hillsborough County air quality update. Are you with us, Jeff?
I am. Can you hear me?
I can. Go, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Let me start off by saying one of the things I realized with this meeting is I need to upgrade my router because I'm definitely having some delay on my video feed. So if I get off sync on a slide because I can't see it, I apologize. Again, I think the problem's on my end. I think the audio-wise, though, I'm pretty good. So let me just confirm, can you hear me clearly?
I can hear you clearly, yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks for following up. So happy to be here today. It's definitely some unprecedented circumstances that we're dealing with. And more than ever, I think it's appropriate that we come out to emphasize the importance of air quality and the connection to transportation. And because of that, EPC sits on several of the MPO committees, and we'll be giving this presentation to other committees in the MPO board next month, just to try to remind everybody the importance of air quality. As I said in our TAC meeting, I think we sometimes get so focused on the projects themselves and efficiencies and moving it and how we're going to fund it, and all that is super important. But sometimes I think we need to be reminded of some of the real impacts, and that includes the environment. So I'm happy to be here. We continue to meet our national health-based standards for the principal pollutants for the transportation section, which is primarily ozone, nitrogen dioxide, and fine particulate. And I'm going to talk a little about the concentrations from our near-road monitoring site, which is only 5 in the state, I believe, which is dedicated to those areas near interstates, and it's focused on those type of emissions. And the other area that I'm going to stress a little is ozone. It's definitely the most difficult pollutant to maintain attainment with, and you will see in a few slides later that we go here locally too. So other than that, I'm going to talk about our advisory systems and how we keep everyone informed, and provide a general overview. So next slide, please. So hopefully most people are familiar with our agency. We're delegated by Hillsborough, by the DEP, to act specifically in Hillsborough County on environmental matters. We have been generally fully functional during this time, the COVID-19. Obviously, we are not in the office except for our skeleton crew, but we are still responding on emergency complaints and so forth. Our air division is made up of various sections. As you might imagine, we deal with large compliance sources like temperature and fertilizer and so forth, and any really industry or operation that releases emissions into the atmosphere. So we also deal with open burning and asbestos. We even have a noise program, which is very big from a complaint side, and we house the sustainability resiliency section. And the focus today, of course, is air monitoring. I'm going to show later that we have a robust network that we use to track the things we're going to talk about today. Next slide, please. So as most people might imagine, to answer the question, why should air pollution be controlled? Well, there's an obvious and well-documented connection between air quality and human health. Respiration is the basic function for humans and animals, and it's directly affected by some of these pollutants. Obviously, the respiratory would be the biggest area, due to everything from simple coughing and wheezing to asthma, narrowing of the airways, bronchitis. Again, I would imagine most people here are familiar with that, and even the cardiovascular system can be affected, and adding strain to the hearts, coronary disease, and so forth. And then the other item I kind of mentioned too is there's the vegetation, the potential to damage agriculture and vegetation. It can reduce crop. High levels of ozone have been shown to reduce crop yields, can impair reproduction of the plants, so forth. So it's one of those things that's best thought about, and it just something that we need to be in constant concern with. Next slide, please. So looking real quick nationally, the trends, as you might imagine, are showing we continue, notwithstanding the past month, we continue to increase with our gross domestic product and our daily travel, miles travel, and so forth. Even though that's increasing, the good thing is showing that our concentrations for emissions are going down. That's through a lot of efforts to control and limit the emissions that are being brought into the atmosphere. I'm not sure, are we on the slide with the graphs?
Sorry, Jeff, you were toward the end. We could hear most of what you said until this last slide. We do see the nation's air report on the screen now.
Okay, okay, yeah, that's the proper slide. So again, briefly, it's showing, you know, we're continuing to increase production and so forth. And on the right-hand side, you'll see that emissions are going down. A lot of efforts. And the only one that I'd highlight really is on the right-hand graph is the light green, which is the ozone level, and you'll see that it's right teetering on the dotted line. And that's something we'll talk about shortly. So that's a national trend, and that's similar to items locally. Next slide, please. Okay, so looking a little bit more locally, we are required to monitor for the 6 primary criteria pollutants to determine compliance with the federal standards. All of them are damaging to human health at elevated levels. And the first 4 on the screen are the ones most associated with transportation, really primarily the first 2, mostly. I'm pleased to report that we are in attainment for all 6. We did have 2 localized areas that had been in non-attainment for sulfur dioxide and lead. They were directly related to some point source industries, and they've, through efforts being done and targeting those problems, we were able to bring those up into attainment. And again, of the biggest concern going forward is ozone. Next slide. So the map on the left shows our monitoring network, which is a series of 11. I'm sorry, I think I got lost. Yeah, there we go. Okay, sorry about that. We have 11 monitoring sites that kind of surround the bay and then move out towards the east. Our Sydney site is the most robust, one of the most robust in the nation, really. It tracks almost every pollutant. And they run continuous filter-based samplers. They measure regional pollutants. And one of the main reasons we surround the shoreline is because of all the industry that's located there, and that it's near the transportation sectors. And ozone, as we talked about, it's done out of Simmons Park, down south, Davis Island, Gandy, and then out east in Sydney. We report all these to develop the quality index, which is something it's an average measure to kind of equate them all, so people will be conscious of when we near a number that could be a health issue. So on the picture on the right is the air road monitoring site that I mentioned earlier. It's called our Monroe Street Station, and it's put there specifically to measure the impact of motor vehicles, specifically heavy-duty diesel. And it does continuous measurements for fine particulates, black carbon, ultra-fine particulates, carbon monoxide, and nitrogen oxides. So it's really unique. It's different from every other one. It's one that we were required to add by 2015. By 2016, and we started it there. You can get a general see. It's kind of near high school on the opposite side of the interstate. Just to the west of Julie B. Lane Park. And one reason that it was chosen to put there is because we wanted to have it next to the highest traveled roadway segment, and so it represents the general population exposures. Next slide, please. So this graph, it's so difficult to kind of follow, but this is just a spot sample of 3 days from this past February of some of the measurements we have. What I really wanted to show is that, as you might expect, it does mimic, and it's a little kind of hard to see through the numbers, and that's due to the winds, but it does mimic peak travel times. So you will see that it in general, over a long trend, you'll show that roughly 8 o'clock in the morning and then 6 to 7 o'clock at night, you'll see is where it's peaking for the NOx emissions and so forth. The dip on the left was due to the wind, because it's a big factor for these, and that's going to be another comment throughout, because there was wind coming from the south on the 18th, and so much of the emissions from transportations would have been going away from the monitor. So that's why there was that dip there. It's really again, you got to look at 4 blocks of time to develop patterns. So the most important thing to note, though, is with all these numbers, that all of these concentrations are well below the health-based 1-hour standards. So the measurements are showing us to be low. So kind of one additive with this slide is to talk about the COVID-19 activities going on and whether the isolation and sheltering we know it's significantly reduced traffic. Is the air quality better? Well, intuitively, there's less vehicle emissions, so there's less pollution released to the atmosphere. We would expect to see a number. We use this station's data. Again, it's a kind of a short snapshot, but I compared this past March to the previous 3 years average for March, and it was about 20% lower. So again, it's not enough to make a blanket statement, but if we do see that, that was for nitrogen oxide, that it is seeming to show that we're seeing some of that reduction. Again, though, it's early and we really need a lot more data to make that. But that's what the state is kind of showing too. They've seen 10 to 20% reductions in carbon monoxide at some of the other sites around the state also. Now, so this is showing true for nitrogen oxides, but all pollutants are not created equal. So we are going to talk about ozone. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, ozone is the primary pollutant of concern. There's the bad ozone down at our ground level and the good ozone up in the atmosphere, which helps shield us on the planet here. Ozone is a secondary pollutant. It is formed through the combination of VOCs and nitrogen oxides in combination with sunlight. So because of that, meteorology plays a very significant role, more than others, in this pollutant. And for that reasons, we are entering and are really in our highest ozone season right now. Late spring and early fall, because of the way the weather patterns work, tend to be the highest levels. So even though these emissions have been reduced across the board over the last years, it becomes a topic at this time of year. And other points on this graph is, in the past, in 1990s and 2000, point sources made up the biggest source of this. Your power plants, your industries, your boilers, and so forth. They made up the biggest contribution of NOx. Well, through regulation and so forth, it's now flipped, and most sources and the non-renewable sources are the biggest contributor to NOx. Next slide. I won't spend long on this one. I just kind of threw it in. If we were to go to non-attainment, which we didn't, we are in attainment. But if we weren't, these are just some of the things that could come into place. It would have an impact on us locally, and we would have to deal with the state on a lot of matters. We'd have to deal with conformity, which adds more man hours and more modeling and so forth. Every project would have to be evaluated. There would be issues with DMAC money. There could be tighter requirements on industry and other consumer products. Just again, kind of mentioning that there would be a noted impact. Next slide, please. The good news, as I already mentioned, was that we are in attainment. However, we are very close. Hillsborough County is the highest region in the state of Florida for ozone. And you can see the standard is 70, and we've routinely been meeting the high 60s. And that's based on the fourth highest reading each year and then averaged over the last 3 years. So we are in, we have a small buffer, but it only takes a few days for it to be a problem. So it's always one that we highlight the most. And, you might ask, why locally are we higher? I mean, it's only some supposition. Obviously, traffic concentration is a big one, the industry located on the bay. And there's a belief that there's less natural sea breeze compared to most of the other industry on the state that are right on the ocean or the Gulf and not necessarily insulated in a bay like we are. But there could be other reasons too. It's just the factors that we have to deal with. As mentioned, that those are significant. So with the recent reduced traffic from COVID-19, are we lower? Well, not necessarily proven yet, and that's because of the meteorological impacts. Why we expect to see lower pollutants of NOx and so forth, the ozone is still forming in the atmosphere, And with a mix of clear skies and the dry air is what really drives it, and a light wind, particularly for following cold fronts this time of year, it makes it right for our values. So much so that we actually exceeded last Friday. So in the middle of all of this reduced traffic, when we really wouldn't expect it, we exceeded. So we're kind of continuing to go through the numbers, and that was because a cold front came through and we got the dry air right behind it, and it just drove it up. Now, we can't say at this point, if we exceeded it with a 71, maybe it would have been a 73, 74, we don't know, if all things hadn't been unchanged. So it likely over. We aren't really that close in any other day outside of that one day. So hopefully that trend will continue. Ultimately, we believe that our area will continue to meet the max for ozone. But just as a reminder, it only takes a few days to a few series of consecutive days that can throw things, a little bit off. Next slide, please. So with that, I just listed a few things that really already consistent with MPO's mission, but maybe just further emphasized, items of importance, and it's really what the MPO was already looking to do. Reduce congestion, keep things moving along. We want to reduce the truck idling, the vehicle idling on roadways, encourage public transit and so forth. The ultimate goal is to just reduce the single occupancy transit. And that's really where we need to continue to look forward into the future. Next slide, please. So I just referenced a couple things that EPC is doing. We have a couple of electric vehicles in our fleet, and we also have a CNG sedan that we still use. It's one of the ones we've had in for 10 years now, I believe we've been running it. We have 2 public charging stations on our site. We also have 2 private stations used to power our fleet vehicles. We do a lot of public outreach. We were a founding member of Clean Cities Coalition, whose mission is to help reduce fuel use and diesel usage and the impacts from those. And look at stuff, we have staff routing optimization. We try to do inspections and group them so that they're all on one side of the county on certain days. We have a program where some of our staff start from home, and under normal circumstances, not like right now, but they could start their route from home with their vehicle on their way in. We also have some of our monitoring people on the park at like fire stations on remote parts of the county with our county vehicle, take their personal vehicle home and then switch on their way in the morning. So it's just ways to reduce vehicle miles as much as possible. So next slide, getting near the end here. The ultimate message is that overall, our local air quality is good. As you can see, there's a very small number of unhealthy days for the national air quality here. And normally it's those ozones, the ones that just kind of rise up to the top. And again, the overriding thing is they're usually proportional to meteorological events. But what we need to do is stay vigilant on trying to do everything we can to keep outside emissions that are man-made from being released wherever we can. And then, as I mentioned, the air quality index that we provide data to the forecast each day, and we do issue advisories as needed if there is a health-based number that's being exceeded, so the public will be known and be aware that there's an issue. And next slide, which is basically the last one. So, as mentioned, our local air is good, and that trend is also echoed across the state. Through our local efforts, we help contribute to the state having recently announced that they have the cleanest air on record. As I mentioned, we had a couple non-attainment areas here in Hillsborough. There was 1 or 2 in Nassau counties, whole counties, and they've all come into compliance within the last few years. And the state of Florida is the most populous state to meet all of the national ambient air quality standards. So with that, we just need to keep promoting efforts leading to emissions reductions and continue to be conscious of the importance of our air quality. And with that, I'll open up the questions.
All right, thanks, Jeff. I see that we have one question from Beth Alden. Beth, do you want to go ahead and ask your question as soon as Johnny can unmute? Yeah.
Hi. It's nice to hear all your voices. So I was asking about the slide, Jeff, where you showed the different air quality monitoring stations around the county, and that some of them were monitoring different pollutants. And so I was curious, how many of the stations do you use to monitor ozone or ozone precursors?
4.
Okay.
They are, there's the one in the south at Sparks, and then Davis Island has one. We have one out on Gandy, and then in Sydney in the eastern part of the county.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Usually Simmons Park and Gandy tend to be the ones, again, we think it's because of their location right near the water, they tend to be the ones that are a little higher.
Okay.
Were there other questions that anyone wanted to raise? Jeff, I was curious, do you see opportunities for us in the intelligent transportation systems arena to supplement the information that you have using our traffic network that we are building out? And if so, what opportunities would you say we should look out for?
You were kind of breaking up, but did you ask about distributing some of our data?
No, I was asking more if you saw any opportunities for us to provide additional data, given that we have a fairly widespread and robust network that we might be able to deploy additional sensors or help monitor specific things in specific areas if there were any sort of point locations where a specific pollutant might be better to monitor for, and if there were I don't know, smaller sensors that might fit within the footprint of intersection infrastructure, anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, it would have to be talked about at a little deeper level. I mean, these monitoring sites are complex, and there's been kind of a thought process by some that you can just get the handheld meter, and those are not the most reliable. And the ones to be regulated and functional and give you the true long-term data, they have to be sited properly and maintained and so forth. And so these stations like we show here are, most of them are every day has has to go and maintenance it and move filters and so forth like that. Having said that, there could be, opportunities down the line, if we knew of upcoming projects or something where, there would be a reason to think that there may be a really high emission of a certain pollutant that we could maybe try to add it. It's just not a snap of the fingers to do it.
Got it. No, that's good. That's good to keep in mind. I'll say that, I've heard of different agencies trying to monitor specific areas through their smart cities network for different pollutants, and it's really good to get your perspective on that being maybe a little more complex process to get something as useful as we would want. So thank you. It looks like there aren't any other questions for you. So thanks for your presentation. It's it was really interesting. It's good to see really how that's distributed around the county, and to see that our air quality is good, but we have some risk there that we need to look out for. So I appreciate that, Jeff. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, the next thing that we've got on the agenda is a status report from Gina Torres for the Vision Zero Speed Management Study. Gina, are you on?
Chair, if it's all right, I'm gonna try to turn the controls over to Gina for a second because I can hear my son yelling at me to get him out of his crib. He's waking up from nap time. So if it's all right, I'll excuse myself for a few minutes.
Okay, Johnny, and then I'll assume it'll be intuitive for me to how to forward these. But anyway, thank you, Brandon. But I am not going to present. You have the the expert who will present to you today, and it's Paula Flores. She's our consultant with GPI. And Paula, if I'm seeing what you guys are seeing, but I think that's because it's Johnny's screen. So as soon as I get controls, I will be able to forward the presentation as well. I'm going to open mine, Johnny. So you let me know when you're finished.
I'm turning over keyboard and controls to you. Are you able to move?
Okay, let me see.
Gina, do you want to show your screen or do you want to show Johnny's screen?
Did I just do that? Did I just move the screen? Then
Yeah.
it's okay. The way, whatever we're doing, it seems to be working.
Okay.
Okay,
So,
thanks.
You have control of Johnny's screen.
Oh, that's fun. Okay, well, go ahead, Paula. Carrie, if you would take it from here.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yeah, we can hear you, Paula.
Wonderful. So I'm going to go through this presentation. Can you go on to the next slide, please? I'm going to go through the presentation relatively quickly. There's a lot of material on all the individual slides that you can peruse through and ask questions about. I'm going to take some of the highlights from everyone. So this is the agenda of the presentation. I'll do an introduction and background at why, what, how, where we are today, and then what are some final thoughts on the next steps. Next slide. So most of you know that in 2017, the Hillsborough MPO had finished the Vision Zero Action Plan. While MPO, Gina specifically, has been doing a significant amount of work with educating our communities and our neighborhoods and bringing attention to the importance of Vision Zero in our Hillsborough County, you know, we have to take on the next step. Next slide. And one of the tenets of the plan was that the future will not be like the past, right? So what does this mean? This means really taking a serious look at, you know, our policies, our standards, our procedures, and trying to create a much safer multimodal transportation for the future. Next slide. So this study pretty much evolved from that plan. Next slide. And why is this important? And I don't think I have to tell any of you on this committee that, you know, Florida is the most dangerous state for pedestrian and bicycles in recent history throughout the nation, and we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of fatalities and a lot of serious injuries that we know that we can prevent. So this is a step forward in that movement. Next slide. So in Hillsborough, for some of you that may not know the stats, you know, simple thought that on average, one person is dying on Hillsborough streets every other day. You know, we see it in the reports every day on TV, in the newspaper, on social media, and we become complacent to this. So I want to urge some urgency in trying to minimize some of the crashes that are occurring on our system. Next slide. So as part of the Vision Zero Action Plan, there was a lot of data that was pulled together in determining even the top quarters. And of the data, of the fatal crashes that was reported and reviewed back in 2017, 75% of the fatal crashes occur on roads with posted speeds of 40 miles an hour or higher. And 75% of all these fatal and serious crashes occur on only 1/3 of our roads. You know, 33% of all of them were involving aggressive driving and so forth. So where do we go from here? The data is telling us and pointing us in the right direction, and that's the objective of the study. Next slide.
Johnny, did you take controls back from me? Oh.
There you go. So this slide predominantly just shows the top 20 high injury network corridors that were defined in the Vision Zero Action Plan. And 1/3 of the roads account for 3/4 of all the severe crashes that we're seeing on the network. Next slide. So one of the principles about safety is managing speed, because the theory is that if you manage speed, the risk to all travelers will significantly reduce, including especially the severe injuries and fatal crashes. Speeding right now kills more than 10,000 people per year, and this is national stat, right? It's right on par with drunk driving. However, it doesn't have the same social consequences that drunk driving has. 30% of all fatal crashes nationwide. It has high society costs, $40 billion annually. And it's a national problem that is being discussed all over the country today. But I rest assured that everybody is dealing with this, everybody's facing it, but effective solutions must be applied locally with our organizations right here in our community. Next slide. We talk about speed. This is one slide that I want, if you take anything away from this presentation, take this one away. Speed must take the back seat. And think about it from this perspective, that if a pedestrian or a cyclist is walking and is hit by a vehicle traveling at 20 miles an hour, their chances of survival is pretty high. It's close to 80% survival rate. However, that same person or bicyclist, being hit by a car at 40 miles an hour, their chances of survival is relatively low. It's just barely over 20%. So speed does matter. So trying to control speed and manage the speed at which our vehicles are traveling on our network will clearly increase the survivability of crashes when they do happen. Next slide. And the premise behind that is your cone of vision, right? At 20 miles an hour, for example, when you're driving, you can see people on the side of the road, on the sidewalks. If somebody darts in the middle of traffic and crossing, or you weren't paying attention, you can react really quickly. But at 40 miles an hour when you're driving, your cone of vision is much more limited, right? You can't see what's on the street. You're moving so much faster. So your reaction time is much greater. So again, that has a significant impact on how people react, but also the severity of the collision when it does occur. Next slide. So the study objectives, there is one primary goal: improve public health and safety by reducing road fatalities and serious injuries. We're not looking to resolve all crashes. That's not what Vision Zero is all about. It's at least reducing the severity of the crashes that do exist. So the study, there's several outcomes, and I'll just highlight these real quickly. We want to improve safety experience for all users. We want to increase awareness of the dangers of speeding and aggressive driving in our community. We want to institutionalize good practices. We have learned through this process that we're already effectively using a lot of great speed management techniques in some of our corridors, but we got to make sure that we look at this holistically from every level of government, from the state level to the county level to the city level. One of the other outcomes will be to identify supportive policies, programs, and infrastructure, and of course have cooperation and support from all the stakeholders in our community. Next. So the Speed Management Action Plan, the study scope had 4 tasks. I'm going to go through these really quickly. Next slide. Next slide. So the first task was our stakeholder engagement process. We have had 2 meetings with all the stakeholders. The stakeholders and our partners are on the left-hand side of the slide right there. Everybody from the county to the city to the state, cities, I should say, FDOT, HART, THEA, and also the health department has been involved. And law enforcement, of course. Next slide. The second task, we actually looked at existing speed management practices. We've been talking to a lot of the agencies involved locally here in Hillsborough County, but we're also looking at national best practices. What is happening all over the country and the rest of Florida? Next slide. So you may be wondering, what is speed management? It's a new term. It is an engineering term, but this is not new. The FHWA has already a documentation, plenty of documentation on what a speed management plan should be and what plan attributes should be included. And of course, without saying, it's always data driven. We're looking at crashes, roadways, geometrics and so forth, but also land use and what is the connection between the land uses and some of the streets that we're looking at. Applying good road design and traffic operations and safety measures, of course. One of the principal aspects of the plan will also be looking at, are we setting speed limits that are appropriate, rational, desirable, and safe for everybody, not just for automobiles. Like I mentioned, institutionalizing good practices, supportive enforcement efforts, effective outreach, and collaboration. So we're not going at this blind. There's plenty of documentation available nationwide, and the FHWA is the lead that we're taking in this assessment. Next. You know, speed matters, and it matters most. And what we're seeing across the nation is a lot of cities recognizing this, especially the Vision Zero cities across the country. They are looking at practices of lowering speed limits across city, across neighborhoods, across corridors in order to minimize the risk to the traveling public. Next. And why is speed such a problem? And it's kind of not an intuitive thing, but we as professionals in the transportation industry have only heard of the 85th percentile speed setting process. You know, but until a few years ago, the National Traffic Safety Board actually ruled out a study talking about that using the 85th percentile speed setting actually leads to unintended consequences of higher operating speeds. So actually, by the only sole use of the 85th percentile, we actually have created very undesirable cycles of speed escalation. It's getting higher, the speeds are getting higher, and hence reducing safety in our communities. Next slide. So you may be asking, how many other methods of setting speeds do we have? Actually, there are at least 3 right now. 85th has always been the one that most of us have used throughout the nation and in various communities. But US limits 2, which the US DOT has put together, is also available. And I wish more communities would start using it. And actually it's based more on doing speed limits or posting speed limits closer to the median or the 50th percentile speed. And then, of course, through Vision Zero and Safe Systems approach, there's target speed. We'll talk about this in a second. Next. So as I mentioned, a lot of communities across the nation are looking at and reevaluating their citywide speed limits. And these are just a few samples that I have here, from Seattle to New York City to Mexico City, Boston, and all of these others. And some of the first 4 that are shown there are already seeing significant reductions in not just crashes as a whole, but more importantly, the injury level of these crashes. So the other cities that are listed on there, every week, every month, every year, there's more and more cities that are also doing and following suit on this. And there's a lot to be learned from these communities and how they made this effective in coming years. Next. So one of the first steps we did, we were curious, you know, so how does the speed limits on the top 20 high injury corridors in Hillsborough County compare to national best practices? So this table, I know it's a lot of information there, but we looked at all the top 20 corridors. We looked at its classification. We looked at its context classification. We compared then the posted speed limits for all of these corridors, which range, some of them are rather lengthy, and they range in speed limits, to the ITE CNU class speed range. And this is a publication that came out back in 2010. This is almost 10 years ago that ITE and CNU had put together, and it's called Designing Walkable Urban Thoroughfares, a Context-Sensitive Approach. It is an IT recommended practice, and it has clearly identified max speeds or a range of speeds for every class. When we compare this to what we have in Hillsborough County, especially on these top 20, the shocking result is that 70% are at least 5 to 10 miles per hour over national best practice. And an additional 15% of those corridors are 15 to 20 miles per hour over national best practice. And one caution I have about this table is this: we're only simply comparing the posted speed limit to the national best practice. We all know as professionals that the traveling public is going on average 5 to 10 miles an hour over that posted speed. So if there's any place we need to start, is to reevaluate the speed, the posted speed on a lot of the corridors we have, and see if we can get it back under control so we can minimize the fatality and serious injury rate that we have in our community. Next slide. So what is speed management? So I'm going to show you just a few of the buckets of different types of things that can be considered. For example, for design of streets, speed management countermeasures will include road diets, speed humps, and tables, roundabouts, this whole list and then some of countermeasures that we typically refer to as traffic calming devices. There's a lot of things that once you look at a quarter and incorporate quite a few of these countermeasures together, you can actually effectively create what we refer to as a self-enforcing street, where even if the driver wants to exceed the speed limit, it makes it very difficult to do so because you are designing that roadway for a target speed. Next slide. There's also ITS applications that can be used and has been used across the nation at other locations. We've seen driver feedback signs here on quite a few of our corridors in Hillsborough County, and those are effective and should continue to be installed. There are signals we need to think about decreasing the block size or the distance between controlled intersections, for example, installing more signals to maintain an orderly progression along a corridor. I know we have access management guidelines here, and some of these arterials, the intersections or the controlled intersections are 2 miles, distance between them. And the more signals we have, the easier it is for us to come up with a better progression, orderly progression to target a speed. Time signals for target speed. I know the city and Brandon, you guys have been very successful in applying that in some of the downtown quarters, and we hope to see some more of that, where you pick the target speed for that condition and then coordinate your signals for it. There's other applications, rest and red signals, excessive speeds trigger a red signal indication. I have not seen that one in person, but communities are out there trying, where you have a corridor, for example, that are multiple miles long, if you can detect speeding at one of the ends, you can then slow down, change the signals as they progress through the system. And there's also variable speed limits that you can apply on freeway systems, for example, and even ramp metering that I know is being discussed locally as well. Next. And then another speed management bucket is enforcement. And automated speed enforcement is critical. I know it's something that we don't use here. There's a lot of communities across the nation that are starting to use speed cameras, especially trying and experimenting with them around school zones where we do have our most vulnerable residents walking to school and riding to school. Red light cameras, we know we have quite a few of them here, but more that are functioning properly will also alleviate some of the high serious injury crashes that we have. And then, other techniques such as targeting enforcement on high crash corridors and higher fines in high crash corridors and so forth. So we have to experiment with a lot of different things in order to achieve the goals that we're looking for. Next slide. So our task 3, this is the one that took us the most to evaluate, was to really come up with a prioritization of the top 20 quarters. Next slide. Per our stakeholder feedback that we received at one of our meetings with all our partners, we listed a whole bunch of metrics that we could use in the matrix for each of these quarters. Everything from looking at posted speed and context class to equity, crash history, proximity to schools. This list is pretty long. So we went back to our office and started looking at some of these factors for each of the quarters. Next slide. But before we did that, we actually updated all the crash data for the high injury network. We updated it since the Vision Zero action plan was completed a few years back. So we had updated data through the end of 2018. And I'm not going to go through all of this data because I really want to talk to you about some of the other factors we saw. Next slide. Some of the common contributing factors, this is what we were excited about, was looking at this data holistically of the top 20 quarters in the county. What does all this data tell us? And here's some of the highlights that we grabbed out of the data. Frequency by age, close to 70% of all the fatal crashes involved a driver or other occupants that were less than 35 years of age. That's incredible to know. This is our young people that are dying, which is pretty scary thought. So if we're talking about education and targeting, educational programs, this is the target age that we need to go after. Posted speeds, 92% of all fatal crashes occurred on 40 miles per hour roadways. While I'm not surprised because a lot of our roadways are already at high speed, it's still nice to know that 90%, this is almost the majority of them all occur at the high speeds. 59 or 60% of the fatal crashes, this was surprising to me and to a lot of us, was that they actually are not occurring at our intersections. They're occurring mid-block. They're occurring in between intersections. So it's something else that we have to pay attention. One, why are they happening mid-block? And then what are the different countermeasures that apply to non-block or non-intersection locations? 71% of fatal crashes involved aggressive driving and speeding related factors. And this is important to know. It's not just about speeding, because when you look at reports, like I mentioned even earlier slide, only 10% of the crashes are attributable directly only to speeding. However, it's aggressive driving behaviors that are also important. Erratic and reckless driving, aggravated maneuvers, ran off the road, exceeded the speed limit, ran the red light, careless or negligence. You have to look at all of those factors, and 71% of all the fatal crashes involved all of those. Lighting, we looked at time of day. That was something else too. 83% of all the fatal crashes occur non-peak. During peak hours when the systems are congested and maybe the speeds are under control because we have so much traffic on the network, these crashes aren't occurring, the fatal crashes, and serious injuries. But off peak, when we don't have the volume and we don't have the congestion, it's when we're seeing that fatality rate. Number of travel lanes and even vehicle type. At the national level, there's a lot of discussion about vehicles, the types of vehicles that are involved in crashes. And when we looked at the data of the fatal crashes, 43% involved a car, 24% involved SUVs or larger vehicles, and 14% were motorcycles. And we know that we have a lot of motorcycle crashes here in Hillsborough County. Next slide. So when we were trying to look at the various metrics to prioritize these corridors, one of the interesting one was equity. That was mentioned many a time. So we ended up taking the communities of concern that Hillsborough provided. We overlaid, for example, the HIN corridors, which are the high injury networks, the top 20. Then we estimated the distance of frontage of each of the COC categories, which there are 5 or 6 different categories of communities of concern. We assigned a point to each one of these categories on each of the corridors, and then we developed what we called a risk performance level. The higher the deviations for these communities, the higher the points, because it assumes the higher the risk. So that was one of the things that we used in order to determine if you were going to focus on addressing some of these corridors, how would you start? So this was one of the metrics that we used. Next slide. Another interesting metric that we discovered, especially after we looked at the equity assessment, was so we felt that transit service routes were going to be an important element to identify in some of these corridors. Again, we overlaid the top 20 corridors on the HART map of corridors and services. We identified how many routes crossed or served that corridor. We identified transfer stations and park and ride lots and so forth. And then we identified also key destinations in each of these corridors. We assigned, again, a point system to it, and we developed a risk performance level. Again, the higher the number of services provided, the higher the points, the higher the risk. Next. So here's the total matrix that we developed for the top 20 corridors. They're listed in what was just the list or the order list if you were to only look at crash severity per mile. We then looked at the crash severity per mile. We looked at ped bike crash rate per mile. We looked at how many schools per mile that were on each one of these corridors. We looked at the equity coverage. We looked at the posted speed, the context class conflict that I had mentioned earlier. We looked at transit routes and then at high volumes on each one of these. We gave them a rating on them and then weighted them all together and determined a priority scoring, a high, medium, and low. And what we found was actually that this table, there's a lot of, changes in priorities. For example, one of the highest priority corridors is Hillsborough Avenue between Longboat and Longboat Boulevard in Florida. Another one is Florida Avenue, Waters to Linebaugh. Another one is Bruce B. Downs, Brandon Boulevard, and Fletcher. So these are the high priority corridors that when you looked at all these metrics, those would flow right to the top as first to be addressed. And I know that some of the corridors that are listed in the top 20 are already under evaluation and have been worked on by the various agencies, and we continue to look forward to seeing some significant reductions in crashes and fatalities, especially as we move forward. Next slide. So one of the last tasks was to, then the county especially had said, well, we're working on some of these corridors. What's next? What is the next top 30 high injury corridors in Hillsborough County? And can we prioritize them just like we did the top 20? So next slide. So we went back to the board, looked at all the fatal and serious injury crashes. And if you're to look at this, the red dots are fatalities and blue are serious injuries. And you can already start to identify some of the major arterials and freeway systems in Hillsborough County. Next slide. So we went down the list and we identified a whole bunch of additional corridors. The map to the right shows you in blue the existing top 20, and then the green lines show you the next 30 high injury corridors. And some of these green lines are very long. We felt that, they're continuous corridors that are seeing, the high rates of crashes throughout the whole system. And for a system-wide approach, why not look at the whole corridor and have that uniformity of improvements or conditions throughout the entire length. Next slide, sorry. So we did the same thing for the next 30. We looked at a smaller number of factors. We looked at, again, the crash severity, schools per mile, equity, the posted speed, and high volumes. And we identified an additional 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 additional corridors that should be high priority and should be moved to the top of the list, including Fowler Avenue, Waters from Sheldon to Dale Mabry. That one popped out pretty high. Bush Boulevard, US 301, and Bloomingdale Avenue in Brandon. So those were the additional top 5 that really surfaced to the top when we used that same metric to evaluate and prioritize. Next. So next steps, we are currently right now putting together, clearly articulating in the problem identification of what we found, coming up with some strategies and countermeasures based on our research for national best practices and some of the local applications already. And we're going to be coming back with some plan actions and implementation strategies within the next month. We do have one more final stakeholder meeting scheduled later this month on the 27th. And we hope then, based on their feedback, we can finalize the plan and have something to share to everybody sometime in early May, possibly. So that's it. Next slide. Thank you very much for your time, and I more than gladly will answer any questions.
Were there any questions? I'm not seeing any from the chat box or from Cheryl. Paula, I had a couple of things. You talked about the national best practices that were recommended by ITE and how those differed from a lot of the segments that you had evaluated. I was curious if you have a feeling or just any sort of general information on what the national state of practice is compared to national best practice, and do you have a sense of where we fall in terms of relative to other agencies or other areas of the country, would you rank us as being further away from those national best practices at this point, or closer to, or do you have any sort of sense of that?
You know, it's interesting you bring that up. NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials, is actually announced, I think about a month ago, that they're doing a new study on a safe speed study and some recommendations. But they teased everybody with a table that they're going to be including in that document about looking at context, setting your speeds, target speeds for context, and looking at that. But one of the fascinating things was that their recommendation is that in any city environment, an urban environment, speed should not exceed 35 miles per hour, period. Okay, so I think that is very consistent with what ITE and CNU had published back in 2010. I think that is, even according to Vision Zero, Leah Shahum was here a month and a half ago or so, and she had mentioned the soft spot for safety and mobility would be speeds more in the range of 25 miles per hour, plus or minus. So when you ask me, are we closer, are we far? I think we have a lot of work to do. I think we're far. You know, when you look at some of these corridors, if it's Brandon Boulevard or if it's Bloomingdale or if it's Hillsborough, and you see 45, 50, 55 miles an hour on an ag-grade arterial, we're more than double what it should be. So I think we have a lot of work ahead, but I know that we as professionals are all aiming to reduce fatalities and severe injuries. And I know that all of us as partners together can make a big dent in that if we could even think about how to redo these streets, because it's not just about the speed limits, it's about, you know, the infrastructure too. We have to look at some of the geometry, we have to take a look at some of the signal progression, we have to take a look at the lack of crossings, adequate crossings, and all of those other factors to go along with making sure that people are staying within the even reasonable speed limits.
Second question for you, Paula. Something that's maybe a little bit in the weeds, but I was curious, you had on one of your earlier slides about what is speed management, the strategy of having excessive speeds triggering red indications. Mm-hmm. Do you have any information you could share with us, or even if it's more appropriate, just with me as a manager of the signal system, on who has used that and what their strategy is, or what the technical details are, who I could talk to about that?
Sure. You know, I'm not a in the weeds type of person, but you know, I got that from the FHWA speed management manual. I could take a look at that. I'll refer you to the specifics. I'm sure if I go back to that document, because I did that research a while back, we can find maybe some communities you could reach out to, or some of their experiences with that technology. But it would be really cool to see, you know, how effective that was. What are the lessons learned, and is it something that we can consider from a TSMO and ITS perspective in some of our long corridors?
Sure.
Especially, you know, and I'm thinking that, you know, off peak, off hours, you hear on some corridors, you know, motorcycles racing late at night when we have obviously significantly less traffic.
Yeah, so yeah, I guess just in full disclosure, I've been asked about that strategy along Bayshore. So obviously with the recent double fatality over the weekend, certain speed-related crashes really capture the attention of the community in ways that other similar crashes and maybe in other different locations don't. And we want to see what opportunities we've got to enable better best practices, just as a result of community feedback and a heightened sense of concern. So I appreciate that, Paula. Your presentation was great. And if there are any other questions, I guess we'll open that up one more time in case anybody's got any follow-up. All right, Paula, thanks. We really appreciate it. Oh, There is one. Pete Costello.
Presentation. Has the study been shared with other cities in the Vision Zero network?
Actually, Leah Shahuma has mentioned that we're doing this. Our Hillsborough County MPO is doing this study. Gina and I will actually be presenting this study at the ITE International meeting in New Orleans if it's not canceled because of COVID. But I think there are 2 or 3 other cities that are doing a speed management action plan at this point, and they're all going to be on the same panel that Gina and I will be on. So it'll be interesting to see where we are and how we differ and how we're overlapping in our strategies. So we'll be learning a lot more from this.
Super. Thanks again.
Thank you all.
All right.
And Margaret in the chat. Margaret in the chat wanted to say, please be assured that D7 will work with you on developing those techniques. And I know Margaret has done some work as part of the project team, operationalizing signalization timing for target speeds, right?
Yes, Margaret's been wonderful, and she's part of the stakeholder team members that's been speaking about that. So that's wonderful to see that cooperation with the FDOT.
Yeah, I was trying to implement some of these techniques, and then someone decided we needed to make it a study. But now we're going to try to just get it done because of the volumes being so low.
Wonderful. Keep us posted.
Oh yeah, I'm still here. A lot of times I don't tell you all the things I'm trying to get done because I'll get in trouble probably. Peter Shue always said I'm the troublemaker, or he says that about himself. He didn't realize that I was one as well.
Right. And I don't mind being called a troublemaker when we're trying to save lives. That's all we need to keep in mind.
I wear my zealot badge very proudly. That's a CNU thing, by the way.
Margaret, you got to be known for something, so it might as well be for pushing for safety.
Yeah, it brings tears to my eyes still when I have to say we had 468 fatalities in 2018. I don't know what we have for 2019, and that is across Tampa Bay. That's in District 7.
All right, one last questions or comments?
Gina Torres wanted to piggyback on Paula's response to Pete. Leah Shalom, is that her last name?
Yes.
She's the president of the National Vision Zero Network, right?
Yes.
I don't know that, I can't remember the exact name of the organization. Executive Director.
Yeah, a Vision Zero Network.
Gina's saying that Leah's very interested in the finalization of this study. Gina sent her the slides, so as soon as it wraps up, hopefully they'll be shining some additional light on what Paula and Gina have accomplished.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Well, looks like looking back at the agenda, we just had a couple of things left to touch on. The first, obviously, was that our next meeting is scheduled for July 9th. And then the last thing on there was the Super Bowl MOT evaluation study. Johnny, was that something you wanted to speak on briefly?
Yeah, Eric Hill touched on it briefly, and I know that I've reached out to you, Brandon. Because Qatar has this designation as a National Congestion Institute, they have an opportunity to provide some grant funding. And Eric and I thought that the Super Bowl being in this area next year would give us a good opportunity to evaluate some of the smart cities deployments that are out on our network. And so we'll be hoping to put together a proposal identifying some performance measures to determine how well our strategies are working. And as part of that proposal we're hoping to develop, we wanted to make ourselves available to the city, Hillsborough County, and DOT for any analysis you might need or any assistance doing data collection. We'd like to participate in any way that we can.
All right, sounds good, Johnny. I trust that you see Margaret saying give her a call, and this might be. I don't know if this is Margaret, if you wanted to speak now, or if this is an offline conversation, but we'll give you the mic.
Well, thank you. Yes, I'm very interested in the Super Bowl, and we have some really good ideas. I was going to talk to Vic about it, but maybe Brandon, Johnny, and I can talk about it. In the county, I'll definitely be involved at some point.
I'd say maybe in the interest of time, let's make that an offline conversation.
Absolutely.
And we'll talk some more about that.
Okay, that sounds good.
All right, so we've gone a little bit long on our meeting. Thankfully, I don't think most of us have any commutes after this, but I appreciate all of you hanging in with us and working through despite the limitations that we are all having imposed on us. Was there any last committee comment that we needed to make sure that we cover before we adjourn? All right, hearing none, we will go ahead and adjourn, and we'll speak again on July 9th. Thank you all.
Be well and stay safe.
All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, bye.
Thanks. Bye.